At this time, let's begin today's webinar, once again, dealing with resistant employees, how to connect with people to get results. It is my pleasure to introduce your moderator for today, and that is Christina Cleveland, Senior Director, Talent Development Solutions at Canadian Management Center. She has experience leading global project teams through complex leadership development implementations and partners with CMC clients to consult through the analysis and development of their leadership strategies. With that, Christina, I will hand the floor over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. And hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We're thrilled to welcome you to our webinar, and we'll get started into the content because we have a lot of information to cover with you in the next hour. For those of you, if this is your first time participating in a webinar, Canadian Management Center is a talent transformation company that is focused on preparing the next generation of leaders to thrive in tomorrow's marketplace. We are headquartered in Toronto, but we do operate nationally across the country, and we're a strategic affiliate of the American Management Association, as well as the AMA Global Network, which operates in 18 countries worldwide. That affords us access to best practices, research, and insights that we're able to share with our clients, and today's content and webinar is a great example of that. As we go through the session today, if you are on Twitter, you're welcome to join the conversation online. You can follow us using our handle @Canadian Management and use the hashtag CMC events if you wish to tweet any insights from today's session. After the session today, you will also receive a recording to the webinar, which will give you access to a visual representation of the slides as well. I do want to introduce my co-host for the session today, Anne Reich, who is a Canadian Management Center facilitator, who brings over 25 years of experience in client service, operations, human resources, as well as practice management. Anne holds her honors BA in psychology and linguistics from Queen's University, and she completed her coaching certification from Adler International, where she's now on faculty. So Anne, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here to join us for today's session. And I know that as I said, we have a lot to cover, so we'll just allow you to get right to it.
Thank you so much, Christina. So delighted to be here with all of you, virtual as it is. You may want to have a pen and paper handy or something to record notes in order to get the most out of the exercise we'll be taking you through today. After all, studies show that retention improves when you actually take notes and write it down. So today we're talking about how to deal with resistant employees. As experts in the field of management and leadership development, this is by far one of the most common questions we get. And clearly, this topic has struck a chord with all of you as we have over 1,000 registered for this call today. Full house. So it's not surprising, really, when you stop to think about the amount of change going on in today's workplace and the sheer number of projects that we're expected to accomplish. Projects that require us to work with and through others. It's little wonder that the issue of resistance is in the forefront of our daily work experience. The good news is that we have some information and strategies to share with you today based on the latest neuroscience that will help you understand the source of that resistance and cut through it to connect with people in a way that has them open up to what you have to say. But first, let's be clear as to what we mean when we use the word resistance. A common definition for resistance is the refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. Resistance itself, however, can take many forms. Let's take a look at some of the more common ones you might be facing. We'd love to get your perspective on this right now, so we're going to open up our first poll.
Great. Thanks, Anne. So the first poll is going to open up on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll just ask you to take a minute to reflect on these questions and to give us your answer in terms of what resistance looks like in your workplace. And we know that there could easily be an option E for all of the above, but we are going to sort of ask us to align to one response on whether or not resistance looks like unwillingness from others to hear what you're saying. Is it arguments and debates? Is it verbal agreement but lack of action, so people nodding heads and saying that they are on board but they're not? Or is it about actually seeing emotional reactions or excuses in the workplace? So if you could just take a minute to submit your response again on the right-hand side of the screen. And Jess, we can go ahead and wrap up the poll so that we can see what feedback looked like from those of you who are online with us today. So Anne's going to be going into a further definition about resistance and what can actually contribute to resistance. But of course, depending on our own experiences and what's happening in our workplace, resistance definitely shows up in different forms. So Jessica, if we could go ahead and close out the poll, and it looks like the majority of the audience who are participating indicate verbal agreement, so C, verbal agreement but lack of action, so lots of head nods. 44% of us on the line indicated that that was our selection, and then the second response to that, Anne, was D, emotional reactions or excuses at 27%.
Okay, well, in all its forms, resistance is really an obstacle to achieving results. I'm sure you would agree. And many of you must also agree that it causes tremendous frustration and wastes a lot of time and energy. And the bigger question, however, is what really causes that resistance? When we're faced with resistance from another person, there's usually a filter in place, one on their side and sometimes one on our own side. And sometimes these filters can have absolutely nothing to do with us. It was already in place before we arrived on scene, and it could be the result of their own previous experience or concerns and the beliefs that they've created as a result of that experience. But the ability to break through to someone who's resistant can require us to park our own ego, clear our own perceptions or filter, and in some cases, show some vulnerability in order to find out more about what's getting in the way for that person. Only then can we determine how we can get them to listen to what we have to say. Frequently, when there's resistance, there's a lack of listening, often caused by our brain's automatic habit to operate from judgments and assumptions, instead of objectively looking for the truth in a situation. These mental filters inhibit our ability to truly listen. And the thing is, listening is a prerequisite for breaking down resistance and gaining buy-in. If you take a moment to contemplate those times when you've experienced the forms of resistance we've just discussed, you'll realize that you were likely in the process of trying to get someone to do something. Resistance is generally caused when we set out to convince the other person, instead of using the more effective approach of creating buy-in, earning the trust, confidence, and respect of the other person. And we expect to convince someone by virtue of the fact that we believe wholeheartedly in what we're saying, and we believe it makes sense and it's important, so why doesn't the other person get it? Well, getting through to someone, or in other words, persuading someone, is the result of a process, not a one-time event, and not a single conversation. And we call this process the persuasion cycle. In our 2-day program, The Secret to Getting Through to Anyone, participants will get an in-depth look at the persuasion cycle and learn a number of tools and techniques that are mapped to each of the 5 steps or phases. Today, I'll walk you through a high-level overview of the process so you can understand the steps involved in overcoming resistance. So the first step involves moving someone from resisting to listening. Imagine moving someone's body language from having his or her arms crossed and perhaps a closed facial expression to nodding and responding as you ask him or her questions. Then we move from listening to considering. Imagine moving someone from having his or her arms crossed to now starting to use his or her hands and arms to communicate. This means that the person's mind is actually opening up to what you have to say. Then we look at moving from considering to willing to doing. So imagine moving that person from surface listening to now actually engaging with you and beginning to give you his or her input. And then from willing to do to actually doing. Imagine moving that person from engaging in a dialogue with you to actually committing to an action. And finally, from doing to glad they did and continuing to do. So imagine following up with this same person about how something went, and this person being enthused and perhaps even excited about what happened and eager to do more of the same. Notice that the first step in the cycle involves listening. Many of us believe we're good listeners, but in reality, we're so busy, stressed, distracted, multitasking to get through our work that many of us aren't practicing effective listening at all, and we don't even realize it. before we can start improving our listening skills, we first need to understand how the brain works, and specifically how our brain's reactions can make it nearly impossible for us to listen when we're in a certain state of mind.
So, Anne, before we transition to talking about the brain, just thinking about the responses to the poll and the fact that the majority of our audience indicated that verbal agreement but a lack of action is what they're seeing, is it possible then that the people that they're speaking to or communicating with never really actually entered this phase of buy-in? They haven't really kind of come into the persuasion cycle?
Oh, absolutely. Whenever you're talking to somebody and you see them nodding often in a conversation, chances are that's just a habit they have and they're not actually taking anything in. Yeah, really good point. So understanding how the brain works, understanding the whole brain and assessing the state of mind that the person's in is what's key to actually being able to persuade them. Without this awareness, you may even employ persuasion tactics that will either be ineffective or could even backfire on you. We're going to look at some neuroscience now and go into the brain a bit more in a bit more depth. So the reptilian brain, or the instinctual brain, is often referred to as the fight or flight part of the brain. And it's all about acting and reacting. There's not a higher order of thinking going on at this level. It's very, very basic. The mammalian or limbic brain is the emotional level of the brain, and this is the place that generates powerful feelings in us, like happiness, excitement, sadness, disgust, anger, joy, and many other emotions. The primate brain, or the neocortex, is the logical, rational level of the brain, and this operates consciously, taking in data from the reptilian and the mammalian brains, analyzing it and making smart and well-informed decisions based on that analysis. Now, normally these three parts of the brain work together successfully, allowing the primate brain to engage in logical and rational thought. And this is the higher order thinking capability that organizations are paying for when they hire you. And this is the brain we assume we're talking to when we engage in conversations where we're trying to persuade someone. However, the reality is, in today's world of high stress, constant change, and perpetual uncertainty, the more primitive parts of the brain are triggered to overtake the more evolved, logical parts of the brain. Let's look at a couple of examples of what it looks like when the more primitive parts of the brain take over. So a few questions for you. Have you ever hit send on an email response you've lived to regret? Or perhaps sworn or thrown something when your boss sends you an email request with project changes at the 11th hour? Or maybe you've completely snapped over a simple request from someone and said something you really didn't mean because you were rushing to get a deliverable out on time and were feeling really pressured. So if you said yes to any of these, my friends, you've been a victim of the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is a small region in your brain located in the limbic region that activates whenever you sense a threat of any kind. Your logical brain also goes on alert when it senses a threat, and it really wants to analyze what's going on. In threatening situations, the amygdala will sometimes shut down the higher brain so it can use its more primal side and respond instinctually, sending blood and oxygen to your muscles rather than to your brain. This is often referred to as the fight or flight response that we referred to earlier. And this means that during an amygdala hijack, a person sees a drastic reduction in his or her memory, ability to reason, and emotional intelligence. And unfortunately, the amygdala does not differentiate between a threat to our physical survival and a threat to our social safety or the safety of our ego. Back in the days when we were chased by saber-toothed tigers, this shutting down of non-critical higher order thinking was a useful response, allowing us to use all of our energy to physically run away from danger. In today's work environment, however, this reactive response tends to cause many interpersonal challenges. Let's take a moment to consider what are the saber-toothed tigers in our environment today. Those things that trigger a threat in us and activate our amygdala, putting those primitive parts of our brains in charge. So we'd love to hear from you on this.
So we're going to ask everyone if you wouldn't mind, through the chat panel, Anne indicated some examples of amygdala hijacks that we ourselves may have been exposed to, but what are some of those saber-toothed tigers in your work environment? So if you wouldn't mind using the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can send your response to all panelists, which will give us an opportunity to be able to review them. We're just curious about what are some of these things or triggers that really set us off. So one example, Anne, that you used was, your boss actually sending you an email or making a request or a change to a project or, something in the 11th hour. That's clearly going to trigger an emotional response from us because it's going to send stress signals through to our brain.
Yeah.
Change could be another example of what we may be experiencing that may cause some emotional response. But we're interested in hearing from those of you on the line, so thank you for getting your responses in. So we see things like stress, threat of job security, deadlines, time crunch, urgent requests, sending panicked emails to people before realizing that I had read something wrong, so there was actually no panic at all. That's a brilliant example. I'm sure that has happened to all of us. Again, tight deadlines, being blindsided when you thought you had buy-in from all of your stakeholders, a raised voice or accusing tone, orders rather than a discussion about a decision, a meeting request with your manager and not knowing why, public humiliation, somebody who points out errors to you, and pretty much anything unexpected that forces you to change preconceived notions or contradictions by a senior leadership team member. So definitely a lot of things coming in here, and one that just came in was a bully. A bullying boss could be a bully in the workplace or harassment, and another individual indicating maybe starting to think about, was I wrong about something? So did I do something wrong? So all brilliant examples of things that happen to us every single day that are actually triggering this amygdala region of our brain.
And I'm actually having a visceral reaction to this. My heart is racing just reading that list because I've experienced many of those, and I'm sure many of you on the call have as well. And the challenge is that all of these situations actually require us to keep our rational minds engaged. This is possible, however, it takes conscious effort, as many of us are completely unaware of the mechanisms our brain engages in during an amygdala hijack. We often don't realize that in order to access and engage that primate rational mind, we need to clear through the filters that we've created. And thankfully, we have tools to help you do this, which brings us to the 9 core rules for getting through to anyone.
And so, Anne, I just wanted to pause on the filter moment before we move into the 9 core rules, because I'm just thinking about the examples that people have surprised or have indicated for us in terms of some of the things that cause amygdala hijacks, and the fact that our brains are so expertly trained to minimize threats. So chances are when something like the examples that were shared happens one time, you already start to put a filter up in place to protect yourself from that happening again.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. You go right back to your past experiences and the beliefs that you've created based on that experience, and those serve to protect you in some way. Yeah.
So the examples of things like last-minute deadlines. So chances are the next time you plan your project schedule, you're probably going to give yourself a buffer of time to make sure that you protect yourself. Or if you've experienced public humiliation, you might have a fear that someone's going to call you out in a large group setting in future. So immediately your brain starts to trigger these responses to you. So even though there may not be an imminent threat, your brain is already pre-wired or starts to rewire itself to protect you from these scenarios. So we're fighting against that.
Yeah, well. and that takes tremendous energy, and we're showing up in a certain way because that filter's already in place. Yeah, great points. Thank you. So in the course, in our course, we cover the 9 rules that are mapped to the persuasion cycle and designed to help you overcome these barriers that you and others put up, like those filters we just discussed. The rules lay the groundwork for you to get through to anyone by moving them through each step of the cycle. And these rules fall under 3 buckets. So the first bucket is get through to yourself first. This is the first thing you need to do before attempting to even get through to anyone else. Specifically, you need to ensure you're operating from your logical, rational mind and that your mind is open to listening. The next bucket is make others feel felt, understood, and seen. And this is about creating a connection that allows dialogue to happen. And our third bucket, recognize and address real barriers. Sometimes you need to use special techniques to deal with particularly challenging people and situations. Here you need to be able to identify what the source of the issue is and apply the appropriate technique to get through. So the first rule that enables you to get through to yourself first is move yourself from, oh, crap, to, okay. As we mentioned earlier, the first step in a high-stakes emotional situation is to manage that amygdala and move yourself from panic, that Christina just referred to, that panic we get into, to re-engaging your rational mind. We cover a 5-step technique that is proven to help you calm down and regain control if you've been triggered into a threat response. The bottom line is that you can't get through to anyone until you get through to yourself, and you can't care for anyone unless you're caring for yourself first. Next, you need to make sure that you're not relying on poor listening habits or operating from judgments and assumptions. And this is the task of rewiring yourself to listen, our rule number 2. We're going to look at this one in a bit more detail shortly, so we'll move on to rule number 3, falling under our next bucket. So rule number 3, make the other person feel felt. This is about really putting yourself in the other person's shoes and creating a connection to that person through the use of empathy. There's considerable research coming out of neuroleadership on the role that empathy plays in creating trust through making people feel like you really understand and can essentially feel their pain. This is the essence, really the essence of making someone feel felt. And when you do this, you don't necessarily need to agree with what they're experiencing, but by acknowledging their feelings about the issue, you'll help them feel safe to engage in a real dialogue with you as opposed to resisting or just pretending to go along with you or just nodding habitually as we referred to earlier. The next rule, number 4, is be more interested than interesting. Have you ever known someone who, no matter what you're talking about, has a better story to tell? Always manages to one-up you in a conversation. If you had a great vacation, that person had a better one. If you're feeling a bit sick, oh, they're feeling way worse. If you're nodding your head, then you know how deflating it can be to be in that conversation with someone who's really just interested in impressing you or hearing their own voice rather than actually learning about you. Being more interested than interesting is about ensuring you shift the focus of a conversation away from you and toward the other person. And it demonstrates curiosity and helps to make the other person really feel listened to and important. That takes us to rule number 5, which is making people feel valuable. Have you ever had a leader that you highly respected, someone who really saw the potential in you? So if you've been fortunate enough to have had that experience, you may recall how you were likely willing to go above and beyond for that leader. That's the effect of making someone feel valuable. And it goes beyond making someone feel felt or even interesting. When you make a person feel valuable, you reinforce their personal worth, which is really powerful. And while all of us need to feel valued, this rule works especially well with individuals who complain a lot, and we all know those people. Those folks, they typically feel undervalued for whatever reason, and the more others avoid or ignore them, the worse that feeling gets. Learning to make these people feel valued is key to getting through to them. Moving on to bucket number 3 and rule number 6, help people to exhale emotionally and mentally, is about deploying techniques that relax stressed or distressed individuals and open their minds to solutions from other people. Often people are so filled up with stress, to-do lists, deadlines, all of those things we've listed, that they don't have the mental bandwidth to hear what you're saying. A great analogy for this is when you have to reset your modem so it can discharge before reconnecting to the internet. That's really what we're talking about when we talk about helping somebody to exhale emotionally and mentally. And until you give them an opportunity to do this, they still can't really hear you. Rule number 7, check your dissonance at the door. Dissonance occurs when there's a difference between how you see yourself and how others perceive you. And unresolved dissonance can really cause friction. And if you don't close that gap, you're not going to be able to get people to connect with you. Rule number 8, sounds scary. When all seems lost, bare your neck. Here we really look at the power of vulnerability in order to reduce resistance. Many people believe that showing weakness, especially in the workplace, is a sure way to lose others' respect. The truth is that showing what we call assertive vulnerability will actually allow the other person to mirror your true feelings as opposed to what you're trying to hide, and as a result, create an instant connection with you. Let's look at an example. So as a leader, you'll be seen by your employees as more human and authentic if you're honest about some of the emotions and concerns you're feeling in the face of maybe a pending corporate merger. This will in turn give permission to others to be honest about their concerns and their anxieties, and may actually clear the way for more productive thinking. Finally, in rule number 9, we look at options for steering clear of toxic people when possible. So toxic people are those individuals who are looking for others to buy into their negative perspective in order to get that validation for how they feel. It's their way of connecting with the world. And sometimes these individuals may have underlying emotional or psychological issues that can be challenging to deal with. So in our course, we look at some strategies for actually dealing with these people. So we'd like to take a moment now to check in with you on these 9 rules. From what you understand about the skills associated with each of the 3 buckets of the 9 core rules, we'd love to hear which one you think would be, or you already find the most challenging to do.
Great, thanks, Anne. So again, we're going to be opening up the poll on the right-hand side of your screen, so you can take a couple moments. I know that was a lot of information to digest in terms of an overview of the 9 core rules, but that first bucket, getting through to yourself first, the second one, making others feel felt, understood, and seen, and the third, recognizing and addressing real barriers. So just based on the overview that Anne shared and thinking about some of the scenarios that you talked about earlier in terms of what may influence an amygdala hijack for you or your experience in dealing with resistant employees or colleagues, which of these do you find the most challenging? So is it about getting through to yourself first and moving yourself from that oh crap to okay phase that Anne mentioned? So as we get responses, I do want to also let you know that we are going to be opening it up to a Q&A segment if time allows. So if you have questions, you can also feel free to submit them through the Q&A panel so that as we get to that section, your questions are at least already in queue and hopefully we'll be able to address them. So Jess, if we could maybe just close out that poll so that we can get a sense of the feedback from the group in terms of which of the buckets that they find the most challenging based on their current situations. So while that wraps up, we'll see how things shake out. I know for me personally, sometimes it depends on the situation as to which I might find the most challenging or how severe the amygdala hijack might be, as I think if it is an intense situation, sometimes I might struggle to get through to myself first, whereas I think some of the other 2 buckets may be a little bit more challenging on a regular basis. So Jess, if we could just close out the poll so that we're able to see the results. So it looks like for the majority of people, answer C, recognizing and addressing real barriers at 55%, and making others feel felt at 25%. So just coming back to the responses or the details of the 9 core rules, so it looks like our challenges are in helping people to exhale emotionally and mentally, checking our dissidence at the door. When all seems lost, bare your neck. So to your point, Anne, that can be pretty scary, that vulnerability piece. And then also steering clear of toxic people, which can be difficult in certain work environments if we feel that we're surrounded by them or that we can't do what we need to do to move other individuals through that persuasion cycle. So great feedback and interesting responses. So again, the #1 response for those of us participating was recognizing and addressing real barriers.
Yeah, really interesting actually to see all the different responses up there. And They're all challenging, of course, and as Christina, as you said, it really depends on where we're at and how severe is that amygdala hijack. I know there are times where I'm in a conversation and I actually know the barriers are there and I'm somehow not able to break them down in order to really listen to that person, so I need to just take a breath. The bottom line is that in order to get to any of these, the most foundational skill that we need to learn is true and authentic listening. That's where it all begins. So rewiring yourself to listen really clears the filter and is the starting point for creating that buy-in to getting through to anyone. I'd like to begin this discussion by having you consider how good a listener you are. So just ask yourself that question and be honest. How good a listener do you think you are? And to answer the question, I want to invite you to imagine someone you work with who you perceive as being resistant. And you may wish to think back to some of the resistant behaviors we looked at earlier. So picture that person that you work with that demonstrates some or all of those behaviors. Now, I hope I've given you enough time. I'm sure there's at least one in your world right now. So with this person in mind, I'd like you to jot down answers to the questions that we're about to ask you. So hopefully you have your piece of paper and pen ready. So what are the words that you would describe you would use to describe this person? So be honest here. Nobody's watching. Is it lazy? Is it difficult? Is it impossible? Just write down whatever words come to mind about that person. Next, I'd like you to contemplate how you normally respond to this person. For example, are you typically very frustrated when this person comes to you, perhaps angry, maybe impatient? Just jot down a brief sentence to describe your typical response to this person. Now I'd like you to consider what filter or label you typically reinforce whenever you interact with this person. For example, I was convinced at some point in my life that a boss I had was incompetent. And I hope he's not listening. But anyway, no matter what he said, I was listening through a pre-existing filter. And in my mind, there was no way this boss could impress me in a positive way. I had made up my mind, so it was very hard for this person to change that. So what's your filter for the person that you brought to mind? All right, let's take it a step further now. Thinking back to what we said about the brain, imagine what might be going on inside this person that elicits his or her problematic behavior. What might the saber-toothed tigers be for this person? So make a few general guesses as to what could be happening in their world or in their mind, and just take a moment to jot those ideas down.
And just as everyone is doing that, some people are responding through the chat panel and indicating that, in terms of how they may normally respond to the individual that they're reflecting on, things like anger come in, or pre-existing notions or filters or prejudice, or someone even responding that, they're on guard when this individual approaches them. So one example that was shared with us earlier in terms of the amygdala hijack was that I may have a boss that's notorious for last-minute changes, so I'm required to drop everything. And I think that that's an interesting example because what is driving them to do that tends to be panic or their own amygdala hijack, which then creates an amygdala hijack in yourself. So that kind of perpetual state of panic can make it challenging to, in the moment, try and settle them down. But engaging with something like the 9 core rules, when emotions have leveled out a little bit, there may be an opportunity that you can better support that individual and manage up to your boss to have a conversation about what you can do to support them so that you can help minimize the threat response and those instinctual, I guess, reptilian brain kicking in and just forcing an impact on other people.
That's right. And that you raise a really good point, because these 9 core rules are not just about talking to people who report to you directly or your peers. It happens sideways, upwards, downwards. It's a way of communicating and really getting through to anybody. It doesn't matter what level they are in the organization. And some may take a bit more courage than others.
Mm-hmm. And a few more opportunities, I would guess, too. It's not necessarily going to always happen on the first try.
Oh, absolutely.
But giving people an opportunity to exhale mentally and emotionally, which I know we've all identified as being, potential challenge for us, your boss may need that too, and in so doing with them can actually create the space for you to do so.
Yeah, that's right. So in the long run, it becomes a win-win. Yeah. So finally, thinking about the responses you just indicated to these questions and what you now know about the 9 rules, think about how you might approach this person differently going forward. So just give some thought to that, and I'll offer an example. So if it was someone, let's say, who anytime you ask this person to take on something new, claims that he or she's too busy already, and you're pretty sure that that person still has capacity. So to you, that looks like resistance. So how might you approach that person? Perhaps you might first rewire yourself to listen, to go to rule number 2, by asking yourself what might be going on for this person to cause him or her to be so disengaged that they're refusing new assignments when you know they actually, or at least your perception is that they do have capacity. From rule number 2, you might actually move to making that person feel felt. And how might you do that? Maybe you might take them out for a coffee and start a process there where you can engage in a different kind of conversation about them or with them to find out what's going on in their world. Ask them open-ended questions and let them express and let them share with you what they're excited about, what's boring them, what's frustrating them, so that they can really feel heard and seen and understood. And from there, it all sort of plays into one another. If you are more interested in that person than you are trying to be interesting to them, that will build trust and create a safe space for them to share with you so that you can work through the barriers and get them to a place where you can have them moving forward in the direction that they want to be moving in and that you need them to move in. So what is the solution to our poor listening habits? Get rid of the filter. The stuff you think you already know about someone, that they're lazy, a loser, maybe they're hostile or impossible, that in reality is preventing you from learning what you really need to know about that person. For example, if you're introducing a major change in your department, say around a process improvement to make way for an expanded mandate for your team, consider what the resistant person may have experienced in the past with a similar change. Perhaps that person hears process improvement and immediately interprets it as a restructuring. And perhaps in a previous organization, restructuring meant downsizing, and they were one of the people who were released from the company. You have no idea what that person may be experiencing or feeling, even if you think you do. In case there's any confusion here, I want to clarify that acknowledging what somebody might be going through is absolutely not the same thing as making excuses for them. You can acknowledge their feelings and experience and still move them through the persuasion cycle in order to get them to do something or change a behavior that is getting in the way for them. In fact, as we've mentioned, until they truly feel acknowledged, you're unlikely to get them to buy in to what you're requesting. And what often happens is that you stop listening because you just want to fix it. Perhaps you want to relieve them of the pain and discomfort they're in, so you try to reframe it for them before they're ready to hear it. Or perhaps you've had a similar experience, so you immediately start offering suggestions how to best work through that challenge. But guess what? Their experience is unique to them, and even though you may have been through something similar, it's different. So what works for you is not necessarily going to work for that other person. So the way you're going to get through to them is to truly listen and put yourself in their shoes. Really imagine what it's like to be in their shoes and ask some questions to find out. I can tell you that when I'm expressing some frustration or feeling some resistance around something, and my listener jumps in with comments like, well, what if you try? Or, and what you need to do is, I shut down because I'm not feeling that that person understands where I'm coming from yet, so who are they to be offering me solutions? And I know they're trying to help, but it's actually not helping in the moment. So by asking questions to uncover fears and the root cause of resistance and demonstrating deep listening and genuine empathy, we'll support that employee in breaking down the resistance and moving toward the action that we really require of them.
So I think this gets challenging, Anne, when we think about the people that we're referring to as being resistant. Usually they trigger some emotional response in us, so we're frustrated by them, we're disappointed in them, we're irritated, or showing anger towards them. So when we are asking in this scenario for people to show kindness and compassion towards someone else, it seems counterintuitive to what we're wired to or how we might want to emotionally respond to that individual.
Absolutely. It does, because in our minds, they're getting in the way of us getting done what we need to get done, and it's frustrating. And why can't they just get it? It just doesn't work that way. And we have to, this is really where putting our ego aside comes in. Because in the end, what's in it for me in order to get the other person on side? Or what's in it for you to get that, to help that person break down the resistance? There's something in it for you in the long run. There's something in it for the other person as well. So if you can hold that frame of mind and just put your needs and your ego aside for the betterment of both, that's going to serve you and everybody in the long run.
And that ends up, I guess, being the starting point, right? So when there's a concept that I've heard you speak about before, and called the mirror-neuron gap, where people will actually mirror our emotions or response back to us. So if our starting point is anger, frustration, irritation, disappointment, chances are that's going to trigger a similar response in them.
Absolutely. And even if you think you're covering that up, people are very sensitive. They can see it in your face. Even if you use certain words, they can pick it up in your tone. So if you're trying to camouflage it, they'll see through it, and they'll respond likewise. They'll respond with an edge to their voice, and then you've already started that downward spiral.
Right.
And it's never too late to take a breath and pull yourself out of it. We can recover from those mistakes, I'll call them, for lack of a better word.
Right. Yeah. And that we have a participant actually who just suggested just that, Anne, that they said, I think a great way to try and deal with those amygdala hijacks are to do some deep breathing when we feel ourselves starting to escalate. So taking a moment to pause may feel awkward in the moment, but it actually could be the best thing for both parties in the situation when we might be experiencing that hijack.
Yeah, and I've caught myself on the edge of that and actually done that, taken a breath, and I've actually used the words something like, that's not what I meant to say. Could I rewind and try again? And the person really appreciates that most of the time, depending on how far along they are, but that's a technique that works. People are forgiving if you show your vulnerability. All right, to close the loop on this, then let's think back to the persuasion cycle. The first step in moving someone away from resistance is to create that space for true listening, so that safe space. And this requires you to be genuinely curious about what is going on in somebody else's world, which means really removing those filters and putting judgments and assumptions aside. The rule, Rewire yourself to listen, is only one of the 9 core rules that we cover in The Secret to Getting Through to Anyone. And today we've only just scratched the surface on it. In our program, participants will have the opportunity to complete a listening inventory and participate in other valuable exercises to take their listening to the next level. And in addition to the 9 core rules, we also share another 12 techniques that will support our participants in addressing particularly challenging situations and individuals.
Well, and I will say that I know that the listening inventory that is in the program is definitely insightful. Having completed it myself, I definitely got some awareness in terms of where I may have some gaps in my approach to listening, and I know that one of my triggers is that I may want to jump in and problem solve or help the person reframe a situation. So if they're, frustrated or angry, I don't want them to stay in that place, so I try to reframe the situation for them. But until I acknowledge where they're at or meet them where they are, they can't actually move forward with me.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And part of that is you're uncomfortable with their discomfort, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
So you want to move both you and that person through it as quickly as possible, but it doesn't work that way.
Well, then we have to get it working for us, Anne.
That's right, we do.
So we're going to move into a Q&A segment in just a moment. So I just want to remind everybody on the right-hand side of the screen that you have the ability to enter any questions into the Q&A panel that Anne will be able to answer. There's some great ones already in queue, and there's a good one coming up, Anne, about what is the difference between a problem person and a toxic person. So we can talk through that. So as was mentioned earlier in the session, that we do have our two-day program, The Secret to Getting Through to Anyone, which is based on the book by Dr. Mark Goulston, Just Listen, Discover the Secret to Getting Through to Absolutely Anyone. This is a phenomenal resource, and there's a second edition that has come up. It's sort of a two-part series called Talking to Crazy, How to Deal with the Irrational and Impossible People in Your Life. And, you know, that term crazy is loosely used, but this is really about transforming the challenging relationships in your life and getting a better understanding of both yourself and the people that you're communicating and collaborating with to find out how you can actually make some adjustments in terms of how you're working together. So one of the things that we are going to be making available for participants who are on the webinar today is we have access to a chapter preview of both Just Listen and Talking to Crazy on our website. So if you go to our website and access the free resources section, there's an area called Mindfulness in the Workplace, and you'll be able to see some additional resources connected to the topic that we have reviewed today that will give you some more information. So Anne, coming up to the questions and hopefully some brilliant answers in terms of what we're hearing, could we start off with what is the difference between a problem person and a toxic person?
Sure, great question. So the problem person, first I want to preface my answer by clearly stating that the persuasion cycle and even the 9 core rules, this is not a linear process at all. So we start, we see where we're at, we may have to go back to another rule, we may have to go back to another stage in the persuasion cycle. So with a problem person, you may have to come at it a couple of ways, try a couple of times. One attempt isn't necessarily going to get you where you need to go or where they need to go. So if you try a few attempts and you start seeing movement for a person, chances are that's a problem person, and by really making them feel felt, seen, and understood and truly listening to them, you're going to eventually move them through the persuasion cycle. So you'll see progress, you'll actually see shift, and sometimes it's just about moving the needle a little bit, and over time that creates a bigger and bigger shift. And this will take time and energy. However, with true intention, you will get through to this person and putting your ego aside and looking at the greater good. If we don't address these problem people, if we don't take the time and energy to have those conversations and listen, those people could very well become the toxic people. Toxic people often may have an underlying emotional or psychological issue, which we are not qualified to address. However, we will still need to find some strategies for dealing with them. I think the best distinction is no matter how hard you try, you just might not be able to get through to the toxic person. The problem person, you will see progress.
Okay. And a follow-up question to that, Anne, from another individual is, what if your role, if say you're in a role, a leadership role or a human resources role, where your job is to convert the toxic people?
Convert the toxic people. That kind of sounds like fixing somebody, doesn't it? Yeah. And it takes two to really get into that process of, and I don't even want to use the word fix because that's the wrong word, but to shift somebody. So if it's your job to convert that person and you try, make several attempts using this process and using the 9 core rules and really leaning into some of those behaviors and new habits, and you're not making any progress, then you may need to look at other resources to support you and the people who are surrounded by this toxic person.
Mm-hmm. And it's also possible, I guess, to be able to help educate or create some awareness for others on some of the techniques we've talked about today, and even having an understanding of the mild neuroscience piece we talked about in the brain. We all have one, so we're all experiencing the same thing or a similar situation or having the same chemical response. So creating some awareness sometimes can help to prevent us from actually getting to the point of toxic, as you mentioned
That's
earlier.
right, yeah.
So another question that's coming in, Anne, is when someone is aggressive or naturally high-strung but doesn't see themselves as such, what is a safe way to have them recognized when they may be your superior? Or is it better to just simply control your own instinctual response?
What a great question. And of course, that the response would depend on the severity of that situation. Depending on the kind of relationship you have with that boss, as I said before, this process works no matter what direction you're going in the organization, and it could very well be that that boss is finding him or herself in that perpetual state of amygdala hijack or threat response, and actually needs a conversation to help them start to be aware. So if you have the courage to be able to share in a respectful way the impact that behavior is having on you and people around you, to be able to use respectful language to say, here's my experience of you and here's the impact it's having on me, and start asking questions to create a space for that boss to maybe share a bit about the frustrations he or she's dealing with, that could go a long way.
And so we had a question, too, asking about which part of the brain do we use first when we sense a threat. So I just put the visual back up for the three-part brain, but somebody asking which of these actually gets triggered first when we sense a threat. So would you mind just reviewing that, Anne?
Absolutely. The threat response lives right in the reptilian brain, in the limbic region of the brain. So it's such an immediate response because it is about survival. It does go back to our cave days. This is how we saved our lives, is to send the oxygen and blood to our muscles, and so it's an automatic response. However, when I say it that way, it sounds like there's no way to manage it. Just the awareness that that's happening so quickly for us, to even have that image of the amygdala actually flapping around out of control is a way to just even realize, okay, if I can just take a breath right now, or actually Dr. Goulston in his book talks about naming, actually saying, I am feeling scared right now, I'm feeling threatened right now, I'm feeling anxious. To even name it, that's the first step in starting to get control over your amygdala and be able to move to the higher level of the brain, the more rational.
Wonderful. So there was a question about the title of the book that we just mentioned, so Just Listen, Discover the Secret to Getting Through to Absolutely Anyone by Dr. Mark Goulston. And again, you can get access to a free chapter preview through our website at cncoutperform.com. A participant shared a quote here, Anne, that they're interested in hearing some thoughts on, and it says that there are some people who seem angry and continuously look for conflict. Walk away. The battle they are fighting is not with you, it is with themselves. So this participant's interested in hearing our thoughts on this, and it sounds like the person is really struggling or desperately needing to feel felt, understood, and seen in that quote.
Yes, it does. And when people are operating from a place of fear because of a number of experiences they've had or whatever filters they're having, it often shows up as anger. And those are the people that probably really need to feel valuable, and they're not getting those messages, and they're really not feeling heard. So our immediate response is to walk away because it is their demons, really. And if we can start to help them move past those fears that are causing them to show up that way and help them choose another way of showing up that's going to create a much greater impact for them and others, that's the first step.
And we'll start to see some completely different results, and in some cases I think that transition creates some significant loyalty from that individual once you've had an opportunity to break through. So another question was, how do you make people feel valuable without appearing as patronizing? So I think this kind of connects into what we were just talking about within this bucket, but how do you make people feel valuable without appearing as patronizing?
That is a wonderful question. There's a skill that is so ingrained in me now because of my years of education and coaching, and it's called acknowledgement. And it's about noticing who a person is in the moment. So not praising the task or the deed, but actually noticing whatever it is they brought to that task or deed. So I see you every day bringing incredible creativity to your job, and the passion that you show is amazing. So somebody who's really high-strung and always forcing, it seems like they're forcing their ideas on people, what that really is overused passion. They're so excited. So if you can start acknowledging that and helping them just pull it in a little so it's used in a balanced way, that's a way to really start making somebody feel valuable. Oh, you see that passion, how wonderful. And then they'll start hearing how you can step into it in a more balanced and productive way.
And with practice, it starts to become pretty natural, but I think it is coming down to slowing down and taking the time to notice and taking the time to acknowledge. And having said that, Anne, I do want to acknowledge you for all of your insights today that you've shared with us. And I know that this topic is so deep and there's so much opportunity to explore, and we could spend literally hours with you, Anne, and asking our questions and first your suggestions on how to deal with our resistance situations. So we do have a number of courses that are connected into this topic that you can see details on at our website. But we are very interested in hearing from you in terms of what are some other webinar topics that you might be interested in. So if we could ask you to turn to the chat panel one more time, again on the right-hand side of your screen, and share some of your thoughts and ideas about webinar topics that you want to hear or learn more about. As we make these available to our clients, we'd love to make sure that we're hitting the right relevant topics for you. No doubt today, I'm sure, was, as we said, just skimming the surface, so maybe you want more on this topic, but if you could give us a sense of some other areas that you might be interested in, that would be really helpful for us as a takeaway. So Anne, thank you again so much for joining us and for sharing your time and expertise with us. If you'd like to find out more about upcoming programs, and specifically, you also have the ability to go to our website at cncoutperform.com. Again, you will receive an email that will give you access to a recording from today's session, and will also give you access to be able to visually see those slides. So if there is somebody in your world that you might be wanting to teach back some of these concepts to, you'll have the ability to share that with them. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you on a future session. Thank you.
And thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.